Milwaukee gave much to the Germans, but they gave a lot back, and one gift keeps on giving. Consider Milwaukee's ethnic festivals. You could spend most of your summer weekends down here on the Summerfest grounds, attending parties that all the major groups and some of the minor ones throw for all the rest of us. These showcases of culture and cuisine together draw more than 500,000 people every year. Why such celebration? Because the Germans made Milwaukee safe for ethnicity. The fact that a non-English speaking group was dominant here had a huge impact. It made it okay to be something different. Other groups found it easier, relatively speaking, to resist the pressures of the melting pot. The result many years later is that no city in America celebrates its diversity with quite as much spirit as Milwaukee. For that, every Milwaukeean can wish the Germans a hearty Dankeschön. The Germans were never Milwaukee's only ethnic group. Take, for instance, the Irish. Their festival draws over 100,000 people a year, making it the largest celebration of Irish music, dance, and culture in the world. Irish Fest is a gathering of the clans who've made it in Milwaukee, but their beginnings here were modest indeed.
Irish immigrants made up nearly 15% of the city's population in 1850, their historical high point. Most were desperately poor, and they were drawn to Milwaukee by the promise of work. Their primary neighborhood was the Third Ward, a former wetland, filled in largely with Irish brawn and covered with Irish houses as soon as the muck was dry. Whiskey-fueled fights were so common that the Irish ward was called the Bloody Third. But there were steadying influences as well. Milwaukee's first Catholic church, St. Peter's, was built by Father Patrick O'Kelly in 1839. It still stands in the Crossroads Village at Old World, Wisconsin. The immigrants also took an early and passionate interest in politics. One son of the old sod, Thomas Gilbert, was village president in 1844. A Dublin-born lawyer with the unlikely name of Hans Crocker became the first of several Irish mayors in 1852. For a group starting at the bottom, politics meant access to power and to patronage jobs. British immigrants faced fewer struggles. Natives of England, Scotland, and Wales blended easily into the Yankee mainstream, only their accents setting them apart. Most of the British did well in Milwaukee, and some did extraordinarily well. Alexander Mitchell was a Scotsman who became the wealthiest Wisconsinite of his time. Mitchell began his career as a banker, branched out into railroads, founding the line that would rise to fame as the Milwaukee Road, and then entered the insurance field. Alexander Mitchell had so many businesses going that he needed a lavish building to house them all. The headquarters of his empire, completed in 1876, was one of the most beautiful office structures in America. 19th century historian James Buck strained for words to describe the Mitchell Building's splendor.
This magnificent structure, the pride of Milwaukee as well as the whole Northwest, was erected at a cost of nearly $400,000. And in architectural beauty and grace, it stands as a monument of what the genius of man can accomplish when unlimited means are at his command.
Mitchell's residence was just as sumptuous. His family's grand mansion was the pride of Grand Avenue, today's Wisconsin Avenue. One of its features was a conservatory filled with fig trees, banana plants, 800 rose bushes, and potted carnations that provided the tycoon with a fresh boutonniere every day of the year. Mitchell's showplace is still a vital part of Milwaukee's landscape, as the Wisconsin Club. The Mitchell imprint on the landscape seems indelible. Parks, streets, and even the airport are named for the Scottish-born financier and his descendants. Most immigrants had less grandiose expectations of life in America. Scandinavians, particularly Norwegians, showed a definite fondness for the maritime trades. They settled in the Walker's Point neighborhood, where they built a succession of Lutheran churches and walked to work on Milwaukee's waterfront. Immigrants from Holland showed their neighbors what a genuine Dutch windmill looked like. Czechs carved out a pocket of their own on the German west side. Its focal point was a Catholic church, St. John de Nepomuk, whose rectory still stands. The seeds of today's African-American community were sown even earlier. Permanent settlement began with the arrival of the Watson family. Sully Watson was a former slave who had purchased his own freedom in Virginia. Watson's man price was $500, and it took him years to raise it, working variously as a stone cutter, whitewasher, and blacksmith. Sully and his wife Susanna came north to Milwaukee in 1850, joining their grown children and helping to plant a community. By the 1860s, there were more than 100 blacks in Milwaukee, including Ezekiel Gillespie, a railway porter who sued the state for the right to vote, and won. By 1869, the community was large enough to support a church, and St. Mark African Methodist Episcopal opened in the heart of Old Kilbourne Town. St. Mark, now in a different location, remains a cornerstone of the city's African-American community.
Milwaukee's German accent was unmistakable, but what was brewing here in the 1800s was ethnic diversity. The presence of so many groups made Milwaukee a city of nations like few others in America. But diversity did not always mean harmony. Conflict broke out early and often. Pity the Yankees. For years they had been comfortably in charge of Milwaukee. Suddenly they were strangers in their own town.
The Yankees found the German practice of drinking beer on Sunday horrifying. The city's beer gardens, they believed, were playgrounds of the devil. Some were equally uncomfortable with Catholics. In 1844, John Miter, a congregational clergyman, preached a controversial sermon.
The Pope, through his bishops, and they, through his ghostly priesthood, can control every Roman vote and use them to carry out his despotic purposes. We see the great Roman torrent swelling in our own fair west and threatening us with a desolating flood. We must strengthen the levee against its rising waters.
Milwaukee's Catholics paid the Reverend no heed. In 1853, they dedicated St. John's Cathedral on Courthouse Square. St. John's was one of the city's most prominent buildings, and it remains a towering symbol of the Catholic presence today. Individual ethnic groups came in for their share of abuse. The Germans were caricatured as compulsive beer drinkers. Even the dog in this cartoon has his own Stein. The Irish were dismissed as irresponsible drunkards. African Americans were the targets of special violence. In 1861, a Third Ward mob lynched a black man who had killed one of their neighbors in a knife fight. But Milwaukee was also the scene of some important abolitionist activities. In 1854, an escaped slave named Joshua Glover was arrested in Racine, beaten, and carted off to jail in Milwaukee. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made Glover's capture possible, and abolitionists were outraged. One of their leaders was newspaper editor Sherman Booth. Working his horse to a lather, Booth rallied nearly 5,000 Milwaukeeans to an indignation meeting outside the jail in Courthouse Square. Stirred to action by fiery orators, the crowd picked up a timber and reduced the jailhouse door to splinters. Free at last, Joshua Glover was whisked away to Waukesha, an anti-slavery stronghold, and then on to a new life in Canada. The names of both Sherman Booth and Joshua Glover are immortalized in the local landscape. The same tensions that produced a dramatic rescue led to a tragic shipwreck. Wisconsin was at odds with the federal government over the Fugitive Slave Act. Governor Alexander Randall, a fire-breathing abolitionist, foresaw a confrontation with federal forces, and he asked the state's militia to stand behind him. Not every company agreed. Members of Milwaukee's Union Guard, a heavily Irish company led by Captain Garrett Barry, declared that they were sworn to uphold the laws of the nation. Governor Randall promptly disbanded the company and disarmed its members. The Union Guard did not retire quietly. In September 1860, the group boarded the Lady Elgin, a celebrated lake steamer, for an excursion to Chicago. Their purpose was to raise funds for new arms. On its return voyage in the darkness of early morning, the Elgin collided with a lumber schooner off Winnetka, Illinois. The ship went to the bottom in 30 minutes. Nearly 300 passengers died. The wreck of the Lady Elgin was one of the worst disasters in Great Lakes history. Day after day, the Irish Third Ward was filled with the sounds of mourning.
Give rest, O Christ, to your servants with the saints, for sorrow and pain are no more, neither sign of life.
In 1989, divers located the Lady Elgin on the floor of Lake Michigan. The newly purchased rifles of the Union Guard were still intact, a graphic reminder of a time when political tensions led to personal tragedy. 7 months after the Elgin went down, the tensions tearing at American society finally tore it apart. Milwaukee shared fully in the tragic commotion of the Civil War. As war sentiment reached a fever pitch, blue-coated troops were a common sight in the city's streets and squares. A troop of Turner riflemen entered the Army as sharpshooters. Rufus King, editor of the Milwaukee Sentinel, was the first commander of the famed Iron Brigade. The Iron Brigade was just one unit that served with distinction in that tragic conflict. Nearly 82,000 Wisconsin residents went to war, and more than 12,000, 1 in 7, did not return. The Northern victory came at a staggering cost.
Milwaukee's greatest gift to the boys in blue might have come after the war. That was the establishment right here of a home and hospital for disabled veterans, and it was largely the work of local women.
Disturbed by the number of soldiers limping home with no support and few prospects, the women of Milwaukee organized a great fair in 1865. Their effort netted $100,000, a small fortune in those days. In 1866, responding to local generosity, federal authorities awarded Milwaukee one of 4 national asylums for disabled soldiers. The National Soldiers' Home covered 400 acres just west of the city. The complex soon became a major tourist attraction with its own theater, chapel, post office, and even swan ponds. The southern border of the grounds was named National Avenue in honor of the National Home. Today, as part of the Veterans Administration Center, the old Soldiers' Home still serves our nation's military veterans.
The years from cityhood through Civil War were a tumultuous time for Milwaukee. The city became a world center of the grain trade and mushroomed from ragtag frontier town to aspiring metropolis. Milwaukee earned fame as the German Athens of America, but it also saw an early measure of its modern diversity. The Civil War tried Milwaukee as it tried the nation, but the city star continued to rise. Despite the struggles, despite the tensions, no one wanted to leave. A German immigrant spoke for thousands of newcomers of every background in a letter home. I thank the Lord that I am here and regret that I did not come sooner.